I hope we are not too tired. It's been a very exciting set of events here. I'm thrilled to be celebrating really Herzl and Zionism because Herzl was one of the great architects. I'll tell you why. Because Herzl believed that the ground of architecture is not gravity, but is the spirit. Because Herzl believed, as I do, that architecture is not based on the ground that you see in front of you, but it is based on memory. And of course, the memory is the driving force in my work because I believe that the indestructible element of what makes a Jew, what makes a Zionist, what makes an Israeli, is the remembrance and also what it represents into the future. We are not just guaranteed that all the memory that we have is dependent on us. Because as Herzl said, if you will it, it is no dream. And architecture, unlike a textbook or some other device, cannot be simply erased, maybe through bombing and disasters. But architecture is part of the city. It's part of the book that is open to everyone on the street. And it is an object that confronts people of all faiths to understand what Judaism and Jews are all about. So building memory, to me, perhaps because my grandfather was an itinerant storyteller in a shtetl, is about telling stories. And that is really what I want to share with you in this talk. So the Jewish Museum in Berlin, you know, it is the first building I ever built. I never worked for another architect. I never had a practice before. But I won this competition. And I won it because I believed that all of Berlin, and this was 1989, just before the wall came down, was unified by Jews. Jews didn't care about the East and West division. Jews unified the city, and I created a matrix that connected Jews and Germans in an emblematic form across the entire city. Not just the 6 points of this urban star of Berlin, but the abyss that this star radiated in the structure of the city today. So the building is really an unusual building because the Jewish Museum Berlin is not connected with a bridge. You know, this was a competition of hundreds of architects from Israel and from around the world. I was the only architect not to provide a bridge between the two buildings because there is no such a bridge in history. The bridge lies in the underground. You enter into the Baroque underground where you see the darkness of the Enlightenment. You see the darkness during the sort of Enlightenment times in Berlin with the prejudice and bigotry against Jews, against Jewish religion. And that's how you enter that space. You enter through there's no light there. And you really, in front of you, you have the kind of, I call it the overture. You have 3 different roads that diverge. One road leads you to a dead end. And it's not just a dead end, it's the dead end of Europe, it's the dead end of Germany, it's the dead end of Berlin. It's the abyss. And it is a structure. You know, it's a structure, it's a museum, but it's not a structure to bear any object. It is empty. It has no heating in the winter. It has no cooling in the summer. It is just a raw space with a slash of light at its most acute point. And when you are in it, you hear perhaps the voices of the kids outside, but you also see what the dead end means in the human heart. And then the second road leads you to a very symbolic garden. It's a garden that is on a tilted plane. I cannot tell you because it's not in a picture, but you would have to go into it to see that you have a sense of instability in this garden. It is made out of 49 columns, 7 times 7, very symbolic Jewish figure. In the center, there's a column filled with the earth of Jerusalem. The 48 other columns are columns filled with the earth of Berlin. And of course, it's 1948, the creation of the State of Israel. I don't have the slide of the third road that leads you, the grand stair of continuity to the exhibition spaces. The exhibition spaces don't have normal windows. They are really that invisible map. You're looking through a map of Berlin, which you no longer see because it's not a geographic map, but a map of people, names. I could not really go to the hundreds of thousands, but I went to quite thousands of names. There are more than 1,000 windows in the building itself. And of course, you see here in this image, the memory void. You know, the entire building is structured with a void. The center of the building is the presence of absence. No matter what you say about Berlin, and it's an incredible city with a lot of hope, but at the center of the city lies an abyss which can never be filled. And in this memory space, there's a beautiful Kadishman piece. You hear the echoes. And by the way, I designed it as a completion of Schoenberg's uncompleted opera. You know, he was a great composer, kicked out of Berlin, Moses and Aaron. He never completed it. He stopped with the aporia of Moses calling to God, and there was no answer. He abandoned the third act. But I completed it with the echoes of the footsteps of the visitors across the void. And you can hear that conversation in Berlin today. And of course, this is a museum that has an impact not for Jews, for Europeans, for Germans. People who will come to this, has come to this museum, and well, it has over 1 million visitors to see 2,000 years of Jewish history, which was not only a history of tragedy, but it's a history of great achievements. And by the way, Albert Einstein was a Berliner. I'm unfortunately unable to show you the Albert Einstein archive building that I'm building in Jerusalem at the Hebrew University. Osnabrück, a building dedicated to Felix Nussbaum. And perhaps you don't know Felix Nussbaum. He was one of the great painters. Here is his self-portrait with his identity card. A painter that almost disappeared because he was murdered. And yet the city of Osnabrück brought his work back. And I created this building, which is a kind of topography of his life. The long building, which is the work before 1933, where his life became hell. The cut, the empty wall, the Holocaust. He was in detention camps. He hid. He finally made it to Brussels, but was given away by his neighbors and unfortunately deported on the last train to Auschwitz. And that bridge that you see to the Altbau, that old building of the museum, which is the bridge which I call of the unknown Nussbaum. And people said, well, we know everything about Nussbaum now. There's nothing more to be known. But by building the project, that's what I mean. If you will it is no dream. 2 collections with Nussbaum's name that has been erased came, one from Tel Aviv and one from New York, back to the museum. So there it is, the empty canvas, the entrance to the museum, the exhibition of his paintings, and in the far on that concrete wall, you can see his painting of his bar mitzvah at the Rolandstrasse Synagogue, just exactly next to the building. And in this narrow space, which I created, not a normal space to show paintings of the Holocaust, which he created, but I thought it was important. He lived in an attic. He painted his painting in a tiny, tiny room, thinking about the silence of the world and the evils of the world. So here it is, the 3 materials, the wood before the war, the concrete, the cut, and the metal, a building that now has an extension in this historic city, which needed, you know, a cafe, an auditorium, and so on. So life goes on, and Nussbaum is coming back to life. As Kafka said, great writers start writing after they die, and maybe so do painters. Imperial War Museum in the north of England, you know, where 15 million people in that area participated in the conflicts that shaped the world. I based the building on the shattered globe. You know, the globe is not what we see in Google Earth. The globe is a shattered globe in fragments, and I tried to put these fragments back together on the ship canal here in Manchester. You can see the vertical shard, I call it the air shard, the earth shard, the water shard, of course, the fire of the exhibits itself. It stands to really regenerate the area, but also speak about conflict, which, as Winston Churchill said, conflicts will never disappear from the world. They will always be there. It is only our responsibility to steer conflict in a positive sense. So the museum is really a museum of sound and light. Here is an exhibition of children at war. It has emblematic objects, the gun that shot the first cannon in World War I, and so on, the Sherman tank, and so on. But behind these walls, you find the silos which contain objects that you can see. And it's a very dramatic museum to bring thousands of people in ever-changing exhibitions that can be adapted quickly to show the conflicts of the world. And of course, the conflicts are just multiplying, and we see them globally everywhere. So it is a museum that has certainly reshaped the sense of Imperial War Museum, because it's a museum of today, a museum of ongoing communications. A very important project, the Dresden Military History Museum of Germany. You wouldn't be surprised that it's the largest museum in Germany, because military history in Germany is so huge. And yet what I did here is I interrupted, I cut the historical fabric of this museum in a very dramatic way with this wedge. By the way, that old armory, which I also renovated, was the Museum of the Kaisers. It was the Museum of Hitler. It was the Museum of Stalin. It was the Museum of East Germany. And after the unification, people asked, how do we go with German military history in a democracy? Well, that's how I saw it. I saw it to create that wedge that you saw appearing, shutting through the building, to create a self-similar form to the first 3 bombs that were triangulated in the bombings of February 1945 that destroyed all of Dresden, that wiped it off the map. So that's what the building is built. This wedge is, you're looking out and you're really seeing the first 3 bombs that created that aim to eradicate Dresden from the map. And yet at the same time, you see this form that actually interrupts the chronology of the old building exactly between 1914 and 1945, the evils of militarism in Germany. And of course, it's a military museum. It's not a museum of peace, but I try to make it as close as I can to a statement about what makes peace. So, of course, it is a museum that speaks about things that come from the sky. It speaks about helicopters, not equipment, but about humanity, the human sense of what it means to be at war. And at the top floor, Dresden Blick, you get the view of Dresden. By the way, the exhibit is of the cities bombed from Dresden. Wieliczka in Poland, Coventry in the UK, Rotterdam in Holland, were all leveled from Dresden. So when you are in this room, then you proceed out, and you are actually outside of the building. You leave at the highest point into the winds of history. You're suspended in front of the building. The military is no longer just behind the thick walls, but you, yourself, are suspended in the winds of time. And that indeed is history. History is not over. It's not in the past. It's in the present and in the future. The first museum, the first national memorial of a country that never had a memorial, which was an allied country in World War II, Canada, in Ottawa, the capital. It's very important that I based it on the Star of David. I try to, every Jewish project, to imbue it with deep Jewish symbols, unerasable Jewish symbols, symbols which form the core of Jewish identity. And here it is. It's standing right now in the kind of center of a new development, but you can see that it's a public space. It's a space which is also made for about 20,000 people, because there are many gatherings during Remembrance Days. It has the photographs here of sites of devastation which are sort of there. And there is also a very important aspect. On the second level, as you climb up the stair, you see, I don't know whether you can see this picture, the Peace Tower of the Canadian Parliament. Because I wanted to make sure that people understand that the Holocaust did not start with thugs breaking windows. It started with decisions of the government to create laws of genocide. And I think that's important, that we have to remember the role of government in creating hatred. And of course, there is a space of memory, there's an eternal flame, and there's a new structure in Canada, in Ottawa, for the first time recognizing the importance of what happened, not just in the past, but today as well. A very important project, the National Dutch Holocaust Memorial of Names. I based it really, the Zachar, in memory of, but I don't know whether you know it, that Holland had the highest per capita murder of Jews in all of Europe, higher than Ukraine and Poland. And yet, do we understand what that means? How do we create something as a public space right next to the Portuguese synagogue in the center of Amsterdam that speaks to who Jews are, what happened to them? 102,000 names, 1,000 names of Roma and Sinti. So what did I do? Those letters, you know, and I consider Hebrew letters sacred. Hebrew letters are not just like Latin or Greek letters. Hebrew letters carry with them the entire baggage of history, which is sacred. And I use the letters in a sacred way. And they are mirrors which reflect the light of today and the light of the city around into the depth of the memorial. The memorial, therefore, is simultaneously the memorial of the present and of the past. And the walls, the brick walls, of course, are standing exactly where the brick walls of Jewish houses stood, right on the site from whose area Jews were deported and murdered. So there it is, a place of meditation, a place of understanding what those bricks possess. And it is quite a shock to understand that Anne Frank is just one small brick in a wall of 102,000 bricks. And I often think how the misinformation about history creates an illusion about what it meant. By the way, in this memorial, I put the name of each person, the date of birth, and the age when the person was murdered. So you see 2, 3, 95, 64, 7. That communicates instantly what the devastation, the cruelty, the unfathomable darkness fell on this world of ours. So here it is. It's a new space. Hundreds of thousands of people have already come to it. It's really part of the public sense of in memory. Thank you. A new project which I undertook in Lisbon. You know, Portuguese Jews were in Portugal before Portugal was even a country, 300 years before. And this building stands right next to the Belém Tower, where all the explorers went to explore the world. It's a museum that will tell the story, amazing story of Portuguese Jews. We know a lot about the Spanish Jews, but who knows about what happened in Portugal with the declaration of the king to make all Jews into new Christians, and how, what happened? How did that society survive? How did Jews survive? How did that culture develop itself? What was the contribution of Jews till today? So it stands there on a street that has all the museums in Portugal, and I named it Tikva because, as Rabbi Sachs, Jonathan Sachs said in his brilliant book, he said, you know, Jews invented hope. Hope does not really exist in Rome and in Greece. It's a Jewish idea. And so Tikva is really that word, that letter, those mystical letters of Tikva really imbue the space with their character of fragments, because hope is forever torn apart before it comes together, like the shards of the globe as well. And I'm using, you know, local materials, for example, the beautiful tiles that Portugal is so famous for, the cork and so on, to create a building that will really be a new light onto the Portuguese society, for Europe to understand, for people to understand that around the world. For example, the first Jews who came to America came from Portugal, via Brazil. So yeah, no wonder so many developers are Syrian in New York. And of course, that brings me to the most difficult project probably I have ever undertaken, because it's a project that deals with total devastation, a terrorist attack, not just on New York. It's a terrorist attack on democracies. Let's face it, it could have been anywhere, but New York is the symbol of that. And so I was, it's the largest competition ever held, 5,000 architects. How lucky that I won this. But I proposed, thank you. Thank you. I proposed not to build anything where people died. Not to, it's still a piece of real estate, but it cannot be built upon. I put the buildings really just in the periphery of the site, 10 million square feet of density, created a center all the way to the bedrock, the memorial, the visitor center, create a public space that people can come to, create a plaza, the Wedge of Light, which is really a plaza dedicated to the times of the attack. You see the Oculus today. The North Tower will be soon built. 8:46 a.m. when the first tower was attacked, and 10:28 in the morning when the second tower collapsed. Space of light. And I show you this not out of vanity, but to show you that such a project requires navigating through great polarization of society. People wanted to do nothing there. Let's leave it alone for the next 50 years. Other people wanted to rebuild the towers as they were. But I believe that only through public discourse can you create something which really means something. And there's my sketch on the left, and a city today on the right. And thank you. And it's, thank you. And I have to say, it's relatively easy, although every building I built had obstacles, to build a building. But to build a piece of a city really requires a lot of time. You really have to be committed to it, and you have to believe in democracy. So there is a slurry wall, which I kept. It's a huge dam that remained in the site. And I was told by the engineers that if this wall ever collapsed, Hudson River is on the other side, the pressure of the Atlantic Ocean, then all of New York would have been flooded. It would have been a true apocalypse. I thought about that wall a lot, and I was not the only one, because when Pope Francis came to New York to deliver his ecumenical address, he chose not St. Patrick's, not Central Park, not Times Square. He chose the wall. He chose to deliver his speech from this wall. And of course, this wall is difficult to maintain because it was meant as a foundation, but I wanted to expose it to show at the bedrock where people perished, there it rises, there the memory rises. It rises out of that depth of space, depth of New York. And you can see today, it's a site, most visited site in the United States. 22 million people come a year. It's a new public space. It's a space that has the thousands of names, some 3,000 names, and the waterfalls, which, by the way, I also designed, because my idea was that you need to screen the heavy sound of traffic in New York City with nature, with the fall of the water and the beauty of bringing nature into the center of the site. And I end here with this view of the Statue of Liberty. I know there are many cynics and skeptics about democracy, but I'm a great believer that across all the divides, democracy in the United States, in Israel, in Europe, in the world will prevail. Thank you.